Well, can science fiction and religion be combined to produce great writing? When David Halperin taught religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, he wrote a number of books and articles about religious matters and mythology. And now in retirement, he's written a science fiction novel. It's called Journey of a UFO Investigator. So we'll ask him about combining religion and science fiction on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is David Halperin, who is the author of a new book and his first published novel, Journal of a UFO Investigator.
Yes, indeed.
Welcome, David Halperin.
Delighted to be here, D.G.
Well, it's exciting for us, and particularly for me. I've got a great interest in religious matters, and you're a retired professor.
Yes, indeed.
And in retirement, you do something that many of us in our age category would just die to do, and that is write a novel and have it published. So what's the secret? Is being a professor of religious studies the best kind of background you'd recommend for writing a science fiction novel?
I don't think so. I think people could, I think anybody can do it. I think my background made my novel what it is, but anybody's background will make their novel what it is. I think the secret is just to keep on working on developing your art until it finally is ready. Took me 14 years. 14 years in writing, rewriting, and... Yep.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that, but let's talk a little bit about the book itself.
Sure.
It's Journal of a UFO Investigator. That title could be fiction or nonfiction. Is your book, what is your book?
Oh, it's definitely fiction. There's a fair amount of autobiography in it. The situation out of which the hero, Danny Shapiro, emerges is one that I actually lived through in my adolescence. That is, having a mother, living with a mother who is slowly sliding toward death, and no one in the family is quite willing to talk about that or acknowledge it. And like Danny Shapiro, I dealt with that reality by becoming what we used to call a ufologist, someone who specializes in UFOs, which a lot of teenagers were doing back in the 60s.
So how old were you when you, this is the real stuff. How old were you when you developed your interest in UFOs?
I was 12 going on 13. I read a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Gray Barker, which used to be it was a bestseller when it came out back in 1956. And it tells the story, or the stories, of the 3 men in black. It was long before Hollywood got a hold of the men in black. And in Barker's book, there are 3 mysterious individuals who visit those who found out too much about the UFOs and terrify them into silence. This book, when I read it, it immediately carried conviction, and I believed in UFOs because otherwise, what were the 3 men doing silencing people? And I believed in the 3 men because they were an accurate mirror of what was going on in my household. That is a dreadful secret that no one dared to speak.
As you look back on your life as a 12 and 13-year-old, were you in your mind now, were you a true believer, or were you a teenager who, like the preteens and teenagers today with Harry Potter, loving the mystery, but
Yeah.
understanding at bottom that it's not real, but still embracing it?
That's a terrific question, DG, and I've thought about it a lot. Because, I mean, if you had asked me then, I would say, yes, I am absolutely a believer. And of course, I wouldn't have given you the explanation I just gave. I would say that I am compelled to it by the weight of the evidence, which to me at the time was overwhelming. But there's a strange thing about my belief, which is, if you had asked me, I would have told you that the UFOs are hostile, that they probably have plans to invade the Earth, a la H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. And yet, when I heard that someone had written a book proving that they don't exist and explaining the sightings in other ways, I was crushed.
That book undercut your belief,
Exactly.
and you were left at a loss.
Exactly. And if I really believed that we were about to be invaded, wouldn't you think I would have gone dancing in the streets
Yeah,
to find out that wasn't true? So the belief had a very peculiar half quality. And the way I explain it to me now is that that belief was the mirror I used. And I think of the myth of Perseus dealing with Medusa using a mirror, the mirror I used to deal with the real terrifying invader, which was the death that was penetrating into our home, which no one could stop. And the UFOs were the mirror that helped me deal with that. And of course, I didn't want that mirror broken.
Wow. Well, that's a poignant story in itself, and sometime we'll look for a memoir from you, from David Halperin, about that. But now let's talk about your hero, whom you concede is based on you, but quite different in many respects. Tell us about Danny and as much as you will about the story, Danny's story. Danny is a UFO investigator.
Yes. And the book starts out with an experience which is based not on something that happened to me. I've never seen a UFO, but I had this when I was 13, I think I had this tremendously vivid fantasy that I was going to be looking up into the sky and seeing a red disk blazing its way across the starry heavens, and that's what happens to Danny, except for him it really, in scare quotes, happens. And I put in scare quotes because the reader discovers very quickly that all of this is going on the pages of a journal that he's writing, which then carries him and the reader into this story where the UFO actually falls from the sky and nearly crushes him. And gradually pursuing the implications of what he's experienced, he's drawn into the sphere of a group of UFO investigators, also teenagers, but a bit older than him, and a good deal more sophisticated. There's Julian, whom one reviewer has described perfectly as Cheshire cat-like, and then there's Rochelle.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you about how a religion professor writing about science fiction and UFOs will get enough sex into the book to attract prurient people, prurient readers like some of the folks who watch this program. And how did you set out to bring a romantic interest into this, into this book?
Once again, I went back to my adolescence.
Oh, really?
And no, I did not know a girl like Rochelle. I don't know.
Tell us about Rochelle.
But I had a dream, I remember, in which I was in a rambling old house in the country at a society of super serious teenagers like myself who were devoted to exploring the mysteries just beyond the boundaries of science. And one of them was a beautiful blonde girl in an evening dress. And as I wrote the novel, I began to think, well, I don't know that I thought it this consciously, but it worked within me. Let's take this scene and bring it to life.
All right, well,
let it move.
Let it live. All right, well, now you let Rochelle really live. Tell us, without giving away everything in the book, tell us what role Rochelle plays in Danny's life and in this book, both in reality, both in the fictional journal of Danny and then as in reality, if there is any reality to it.
Let's say that she is both a hypersexed and uninhibited teenager and an archetypal wise woman. That she initiates Danny into various mysteries, and one of the things that's alien to him, and the book focuses on the, I would say alienness is probably the key issue in the book, that sex is something alien to him. And then later in the book, when he has entered a world so bizarrely and frighteningly alien that he doesn't know what to do with it and is mostly interested in finding some way of getting out, it's Rochelle who helps him understand what's going on with him.
Is it fair to say that Rochelle is his romantic interest?
Absolutely,
in this, and that it only it works out in a way, in an unexpected ways, that only a retired professor of religion could make up?
I will take that as a very high compliment.
No, I think it is. But one of the things readers, some readers, you have to stay right on facts and believability. You can't stretch their imagination at all. And you'd think that a religion professor, even one who's dealt scholarly with myths, and would have a tough time getting out of the boundaries of realism. Were you a religion professor who just felt bound up all the time by the facts and were happy to escape into fiction, or was this hard for you to do?
Yes and yes.
No, I'm not supposed to ask yes or no questions.
No, it was yes and yes. It was hard for me to do, but it was also something immensely liberating. That I realized. What brought me to writing this book was a knowledge that my UFO investigator past was not just sort of a blip, a meaningless adolescent eccentricity, but it was something that was enormously important for me. And to avoid any ambiguity, I will say here that I do not believe in UFOs the way the term is usually understood. I don't think we're being visited by beings from outer space. And yet that belief, the belief that our skies are penetrated by the alien, was something vital to me. And I needed to explore it. And I realized that to try to explore it in the standard discursive language of academia was not enough, because that stands outside. And what I wanted to do was to explore the myth of UFOs from the perspective of a writer who once believed that myth and of a protagonist who lives that myth.
I love it. A lot of times when people's belief system is destroyed, they become so anti their old belief. But you no longer believe, but you are very sympathetic to the believer.
Well, I found out that the more, here I go to college and I set this UFO nonsense behind me. Now what do I study? Ezekiel's wheels.
Well, tell us about, first of all, I want to get to Ezekiel's wheel if we possibly can. It's most interesting. But Danny grew up Jewish.
Yeah.
And as I think you did as well.
I sure did.
And your scholarly writing has also influenced this book in the sense that religion is on many pages in this book. And these people visit Jerusalem. Why is the discussion of the Jewish state, the conflict, and Old Testament religion become such a important part of this book?
Well, I guess an obvious answer is that's where I come from. That's what I grew up with, and that was my brand of religion. And visiting Israel and being in Israel was and still is extremely important to me.
Can I try to nudge you to then say, how did you make the Jerusalem, the 6 Day War, or the pre-6 Day War, Israel, intersected and interwoven with the aliens and the UFOs who have also infiltrated your novel.
Well, people, this is extraordinary, DG. That Jerusalem, if you want to deal with alienness and with other worlds, Jerusalem is the place to do it. There's an extraordinary mythology of Jerusalem that makes it a border town, as it were, between earth and heaven. And compound this with that before the 6 Day War of 1967, Jerusalem was a city sitting right on a border with a wall running through it, barbed wire fence, dividing Israeli Jerusalem from Jordanian Jerusalem, and for each side, the other was an unattainable alien realm. So Jerusalem is another dimension to that whole theme.
The way you explain, it's a
alienness.
natural place for a science fiction UFO novel to go.
To me, it was. To me, it was. To me, the Jerusalem mythology is as fantastic and amazing as any of this.
Yeah, if a Bible scholar who wants to get into science fiction, this would be a good place to start, because you edges the Old Testament scholarship and the whole Jerusalem experience into UFOs, and that leads me back to the question that you were just about to answer before I interrupted you, and that is the place of Ezekiel and other Old Testament and New Testament places where heaven comes down or earth goes up to heaven. And was there a real spaceship in Ezekiel? It's not just dry bones walking around, it's spaceships?
I don't think a spaceship at all. It may have been a UFO, but it wasn't a spaceship.
What's the difference?
Well, because let's say that the UFO is, and I'm going to use the Jungian language, which I think is very useful here. The UFO is the archetypal image that emerges from within us, and the spaceship is the modern conventionalization of it.
I see, okay.
And I would think that perhaps angels were the ancient conventionalization of it.
That's only if it's myth, is that we're imposing it. Then in Old Testament times, I would impose it via angels or something.
Yeah.
Now today I would say I saw a spaceship. But always from your point of view, it's not real, it's the myth inside.
Ah, but is myth real? Remember what Rochelle says to Daddy. Myths are real. If they weren't, they wouldn't stay around for centuries. They'd vanish like last year's top tunes.
All right, well now tell us, we're curious about Ezekiel's wheel, but most of us haven't read Ezekiel recently.
Well, you start out with the first chapter, which is, you'll find it very rough going. I find it very rough going. Ezekiel sees this extraordinary vision, a great cloud coming out of the north, a strong wind, fire flashing up. Out of the fire come 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces, 3 animal and 1 human. And then at first on the earth, and then it appears lifting up into the air, at first 1 wheel and then 4 wheels. A wheel within a wheel, and each wheel has eyes round about it. Now, what is Ezekiel talking about? I don't know. I assume that the lines on which we have to explore this are those of the imagery of the ancient Near East. There's a coin from Gaza from about 150 years after Ezekiel that shows a bearded god sitting on a winged chariot with an enormous wheel. And yet this iconography of the ancient Near East, to me, is not enough to explain what Ezekiel saw. And I think there is something coming out of his unconscious that grafts itself onto this iconography, just as I believe in modern times, there's something coming out of our unconscious that grafts itself onto the familiar iconography of space vehicles.
You've been very clear in your conversation with us that you no longer believe in UFOs.
In the conventional sense.
I don't know what that means, but
yeah.
but nevertheless, there is a a strong, small but a strong group of
Yeah.
of very serious believers, and you must have, this title and this discussion
Yeah.
must have put you back in contact with some of your former colleagues in the
It
belief community.
sure
And
has.
how's that been?
It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. So many of the people I corresponded with when we were teen ufologists in the 1960s now are still very interested in ufology in their 60s. And I must tell you, these are some of the most intelligent, some of the most serious people you'd ever want to deal with. And at least one of them who is still convinced that there is a phenomenon out there beyond whatever we graft onto it. He can ask me questions about this or that sighting. I can't begin to answer. I can only shrug and say, I don't know.
So you are agnostic rather than non-believer maybe on this.
I would say non-believer but baffled.
But baffled. Great. Now that leads me to a question that just pops up because of your experience as Danny's as growing up Jewish. You left behind your belief in UFOs.
Yes.
At an early in your teenage years.
Yes.
But now, what about your religious experience? Is there an analogy between your growing up out of UFOs and also the way a very scholarly person approaches religion?
I think so. Yes.
Would you describe that for us?
Yes, I think that becoming a Judaic scholar allowed me to do something that was valuable for me, and yet I'm not sure was at bottom satisfactory. That is to say, to experience my Jewish faith vicariously through the study of it. Now, Judaism gives room for that in a way that many other religions don't, in that in traditional Judaism, study is itself a religious act.
Right.
But I have to tell you that I still continue study as a quasi-religious act. During the regular, except for the summer break, every Saturday afternoon I study Talmud with a group of friends and feel this as an almost religious connection with my past and my tradition. But I need to say that I have also felt the need for a more active religious community and have found it in a Unitarian Universalist congregation.
Well, does that mean that you've left your Jewish beliefs, and I say beliefs first, behind, or do you, of course you keep up with, as you say, with some of the traditions of studying the Talmud, but what's your belief system right now?
My belief system, I both disbelieve and believe in God.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that philosophically it's terribly hard for me to believe that there is a benevolent being who oversees our affairs. And yet, from inside, whether this is imprinted on me by the memory of my parents when I was 6 months old, or whether this comes from some more deeper, more universal and archetypal source, I don't know. But inside me, there is that image of God, which I don't think I could get rid of if I wanted to, and I don't think I want to. So I disbelieve and I believe.
Intellectually, I put words in your
Yeah.
Intellectually, you don't believe. Deep down in your soul, you believe in a God of some sort.
Yeah, that it's I'm not even sure the word believe is a useful one there. That God is present, sort of like the intellectual disbelief is perhaps the upper 1/10 of the iceberg.
Wow. Well, we talk about this all day long. Before we stop, we're out of time. But are you working on a sequel to this or another novel that we can look for?
Absolutely.
Is it going to be science fiction in the same sense? More about Danny?
It's more about Danny. It's about a period that is Danny in a period, the late 60s, when the real world turns as phantasmagoric
Oh,
as
well.
Danny's science fiction world.
Well, I can't wait. I think Journal of a UFO Investigator is an imaginative work that will receive an incredible amount of attention and appreciation from many people. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to David Halperin, the author of Journal of a UFO Investigator. Thanks to all y'all for watching and listening. I hope that you'll join us again next week at the same time. In the meantime, check our website for more information about our authors and our upcoming programs. See you next week.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.